Today, it's easy to see the Diablo as one of the collectible supercar icons of the 90s, but it had such a painful, tortured birth that it may as well have been named not after a fighting bull, but after the devil himself. Before its launch, the Diablo had to be redesigned repeatedly, causing years of delay, which meant it arrived not into the hottest supercar market of all time, during which it was designed, but instead into a major market crash. Its life once it went on sale wasn't exactly easy either. Despite only being made for 11 years, the Diablo's development and production spanned 4 different owners of the company Automobili Lamborghini. The company's fortunes rose and fell so many times that it's surprising that they even survived, and no other model in Lamborghini's history saw so much turmoil firsthand. So what does this mean for the car itself? Is it a real Lamborghini? Is it any good? Time to find out. Ferruccio Lamborghini started Automobili Lamborghini in 1963, but just 11 years later, he had already sold all his shares in the company. The buyers were a pair of Swiss businessmen who, while well-intentioned, were so hands-off that the company was bankrupt by 1980. A pair of French brothers, Patrick and Jean-Claude Mimran, took over management, and a few months later they had turned things around enough that they bought Automobili Lamborghini outright in 1981. The Mimrans were competent and enthusiastic, investing in product just in time for Lamborghini to field a perfectly outrageous model line during the conspicuous consumption craze of the 1980s. The centerpiece of this was of course the Countach, which despite appearing in 1971, seemed just right for the outlandish tastes of the 1980s with its new flared, bespoilered looks. Inside Lamborghini, however, it was clear that a replacement was needed. While the Countach's predecessor, the Miura, lasted about 7 years, the Countach had already been around for over a decade before work on its replacement even began, thanks to all of the company issues during the 1970s. Meanwhile, a whole host of high-tech exotics appeared during the 1980s, whether that was the composite-bodied twin-turbocharged Ferraris, or Porsche's 959, which also added four-wheel drive and massive, then, computing power. To stay competitive, Lamborghini's flagship V12 supercar needed to have better aerodynamics, ergonomics, features, comfort, performance, and gasp, even emissions. And thus Project 132 was born in 1985. The brief was simple, to replace the Countach with something that was better in all these respects but maintained the identity of the company to ensure that Lamborghini remained competitive. Oh, and to make the world's fastest production car. To lead the project, Patrick Mimran hired Luigi Marmiroli, who had previously worked as an engineer at Ferrari and then headed Alfa Romeo's F1 team. Much of the core characteristics of the new car remained the same as the Countach. The powertrain retained the unusual arrangement with the V12 longitudinally mounted with the transmission in front of it, opposite to how most mid-engine cars are laid out. One of the great benefits of this was that it would be easy to create a four-wheel drive version of the car, since power could simply be transmitted from the front of the transmission to the front axle. Also like the Countach, the chassis was a space frame with double wishbone suspension. Thus, the basic layout of Project 132 was nothing new. Its differences lay primarily in modernizing the familiar Countach concept, whether this was in the form of computer-aided design for the new chassis, or the totally new electronic fuel injection system for the engine. The engine was an evolution of the same Bizzarini one that Lamborghini had used since its beginning in 1963. At that point, their most powerful car engine was the Countach Quattrovalvole's 5.2-liter 4-valve V12. With 6 downdraft carburetors, it made 455 horsepower, 70 more than Ferrari's Testarossa, although the Countach's impressive lack of aerodynamic efficiency meant that both cars topped out around 180 miles an hour. Thus, a more powerful but also cleaner engine and dramatically less drag were both high priorities for the new Lamborghini, so that it could surpass not only the Testarossa but also the 200 mile an hour plus F40 and 195 mile an hour plus 959. To design this new bodywork, Lamborghini approached Marcello Gandini. Years earlier, while at Bertone, he had designed both the Miura and the Countach, but was by now freelancing. He was happy to oblige, producing a concept that had nearly a quarter less drag than the Countach. This was confirmed when the development team trailered the prototype behind a Volvo station wagon all the way to a wind tunnel outside of Paris in March of 1987 because they didn't trust anyone working at an Italian wind tunnel to keep their mouths shut about the new flagship Lamborghini. Fitted with a newly developed electronically injected 5.2-liter engine, the prototype was tested at the high-speed Nardo test track in June, where it was fast, but not fast enough. and so the engine was expanded half a liter to 5.7 liters. But things were already heading south. 2 months earlier, on the 22nd of April 1987, the then still unnamed Diablo prototype was started and moved under its own power around the factory for the first time. It was a big moment, celebrated with champagne, but the next day it was announced that Chrysler had bought Lamborghini. This initially seemed like good news, finally some financial security to help the company grow. Chrysler CEO Lee Iacocca visited Lamborghini for the first time after the purchase in June and described the prototype as terrific, but 2 weeks later, feedback from Chrysler stylists on the car's design started to arrive at Lamborghini. This created a lot of friction and resentment within Lamborghini, where the point of view was that the car was nearly ready to enter production and was on schedule to launch less than a year later in May of 1988. Lamborghini president Emile Navarro pushed back on Chrysler, but a massive road accident the following month while driving his Audi to Monte Carlo put him in the hospital for about 6 months, and Chrysler continued to meddle largely unchecked. Soon, Chrysler was sending not just suggestions, but full clay models, and Gandini, who was offended but still working to appease the new bosses, produced a revised design in October. Chrysler had yet more feedback, and Gandini duly completed a third revision in June of 1988, a month after the production version of the Diablo was supposed to launch. Chrysler continued to request changes, albeit smaller ones, so the work of preparing the car for production could finally begin. The Diablo finally launched in January of 1990. Its interior was designed almost exclusively in Detroit by Chrysler stylists, and the exterior had a smoothed, modern look which looks good now, but was a disappointment to many at Lamborghini on account of the car's troubled gestation. To outsiders, however, the car was a success. It was properly fast, more than 200 miles per hour. It looked like a Lamborghini and was easier to drive, safer, more comfortable, had more features, and emitted less than the Countach. The waiting list had been long, fueled especially by 1989's superheated exotic car bubble, which unfortunately popped just as the Diablo was entering production. Sales of all exotics cratered in the early 90s, and by 1993 Chrysler had had enough and sold Lamborghini to an Indonesian conglomerate headed by Tommy Suharto, the youngest son of Indonesia's president. A few years later, the Asian financial crisis saw Automobili Lamborghini for sale once again, and it was then in 1998 that Ferdinand Piëch, acting as chairman of the Volkswagen Group, stepped in and bought the company and placed it under the control of Audi. Through all of this absurdity, the Diablo didn't just soldier on, but improved steadily and meaningfully. The four-wheel drive variant, which couldn't be completed in time for the car's launch in 1990, appeared in 1993. Called the VT for viscous traction, it was predominantly rear-wheel drive unless the car detected slippage, in which case a viscous clutch could engage and send up to 25% of the power to the front axle. Bigger brakes and power steering also appeared at this time, as did adjustable shocks. 2 years after that, a Roadster version appeared, making the Diablo the first V12 Lamborghini to be sold in open form. More pared-down rear-wheel drive performance variants appeared in the form of the 30th Anniversary Special Edition and the SV, while Audi immediately set to work making major improvements to the Diablo as soon as they bought the company. These appeared in the Diablo's final iteration, the 6.0, which ran until 2001. With such a troubled development process, it's easy to imagine the Diablo experience will be disjointed, but it is full of surprises, and almost all of them are pleasant. The car's presence is so dramatic and brutish that it sets the expectation that it will be beastly, cantankerous, uncooperative, heavy-feeling, and generally not athletic. The Countach has all of these characteristics to some extent, and it's natural to imagine the Diablo will be the same. Initial impressions support this. The car is physically large and rear quarter visibility is poor. The sills are wide and ingress around the scissor doors is difficult to achieve gracefully, especially for drivers who aren't also Olympic gymnasts. The steering wheel position will annoy all drivers possessing anything close to normal-sized arms because it is such a long reach. The clutch is heavy and the engine explodes to life with a glorious cacophony that will delight actual and spiritual 14-year-olds while deeply offending everyone else. And then there's perceived quality. The instrument panel is simply a flat sheet of what may very well be metal with circular holes cut in it for instruments, while the warning lights are disguised in a black strip across the dash, which seems clever until you realize that they're all crooked because the strip curves to follow the flowing contour of the dashboard. The roof latches appear to have come from a hardware store. And this is all fine, honestly. Italian car companies, Lamborghini especially, have a long and illustrious history of focusing on more important things. It can be charitably described as charming, and for buyers of these cars, none of that matters when you regard the car holistically. Very few other cars exist which provide such a sense of occasion, so what does it matter if some of the interior trim is crude? The clumsiness and brashness of the detailing, ingress, clutch, and engine startup evaporate the moment the driver sets off. The power steering of the VT is surprisingly manageable in weight, light even, at low speeds, while the clutch is wonderfully progressive and easy to manage, even during a famously challenging San Francisco hill start. The dogleg gear change is lighter than that of a contemporary Ferrari and has a precise, mechanical, expensive feel that gives a clue into where all the money in this car went. The engine does the same. The glorious V12 noises are deeper in tone than those of a Ferrari, and it turns even mundane pottering around into an overwhelming sensory experience that fully supports David E. Davis's claim that every car enthusiast should own a V12 in their lifetime. It is responsive and sounds like heaven, but initially leaves the driver with the impression that perhaps not all of the 530 or so horsepower are accounted for. And that is true until you rev it out. As RPMs build, so too does power, and above 5,000 RPM, the car evolves from pleasantly swift to alarmingly rapid. It is a good old naturally aspirated experience that is so special that it makes the driver seek every opportunity to visit the spicy part of the tachometer, public decorum be damned. It is no surprise that a 12-cylinder Lamborghini has a great powertrain, but the poise of the chassis is wholly unexpected. At normal speeds and on anything but smooth surfaces, a chorus of various interior creaks and rattles reinforce the slipshod impression, but on a well-paved road the car has unexpected poise. It is shockingly lithe on twisty roads. It is intuitive and feels much smaller than it is, with well-controlled body motion, very little body roll, and genuinely great brakes. Grip for both cornering and putting down power is tremendous, while the engine noise and the pleasure of the gear change make the driver feel like a hero when hustling the car. These cars have a reputation for being difficult to manage at and beyond the limit, and the reputation may very well be deserved, but for almost any public road task, the Diablo is a delightful dance partner. It is a fast car, but it does not mask speed. You'll never find yourself unaware of how quickly you're going. Not in a scary way, but in a direct, communicative, honest way. The result is a car that is exciting in all the right ways, a genuine pleasure to use as long as the road is smooth enough. The Diablo absolutely does what it says on the box, and that box promises quite a lot. This is not a car to drive if you dislike talking to strangers, nor is it a car to drive if you don't have the extra time to dedicate to doing so. It has all of the subtlety of a rocket-propelled grenade, and while its first impressions don't exactly exude quality, the underlying engineering substance of this car is absolutely tremendous. It is a thoroughbred performance car designed for those who revel in driving quickly, not in an effortless way, but in a 110% experience sort of way. Since taking over, Audi has turned Lamborghini into a world-class company, and that's why it survives and thrives today. But the Diablo was the end of Lamborghini's beginning as a charming underdog, always nervously looking over its shoulder to keep bankruptcy at bay. This is what makes it special. The Diablo is a long way from perfect. Some parts of it are bad even, although those parts aren't important to the enthusiast. This makes it very much an extension of all the Lamborghinis that came before it. Like all these other cars, it's doing the best it can, and what it delivers experientially and in terms of engineering is truly special, more than making up for its peripheral shortcomings. It is a totally authentic, properly Italian, arresting, overwhelming experience that makes it the perfect antidote to indifference and ordinariness.